Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson. We did a previous one, Luke 6:17 through 36. We're going to be picking on that to the close of the chapter. But another way of thinking of this lesson is the capstone of a trilogy, the third part of a three-part series. So in the sixth chapter, we read Luke's version of what is known as the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, which spans the range of three chapters in that. And the way we've presented it so far is the original, the 6:17 through 36 one, mostly corresponds with Matthew's fifth chapter. Then the one we did on 11:1-13 and 12:22 through 34 roughly overlaps with the sixth chapter. And there's a lot of Luke, even in its combined form, is not as detailed as Matthew's depiction of the sermon, and that's probably because Matthew was present at the occasion where Luke was a post-resurrection convert. But there's also a lot of things Luke says that Matthew doesn't say that are equally beautiful and profound and meaningful and relevant for us and necessary for us to know. And it's quite an oversimplification because in the range we're going to be covering today, this mostly corresponds with what we read of in the seventh chapter in the book of Matthew, but we also caught a glimpse of his version of the golden rule, of which we read of in Matthew 7:12, in a verse earlier in the sixth chapter, and also in the 11th chapter after he gives his rendition of the Lord's Prayer, which was not delivered in a sermon in Luke's portrayal of it, but in response to a question asked by the disciples. And then we also read after that the parable. He teaches in a parable which more or less corresponds to what we read of in Matthew 7 through 11. But here it really opens with the seventh chapter. The first few verses of which we're going to read bear an unmistakable and uncanny resemblance to the first five verses we read of in Matthew's seventh chapter. So that being said, we're going to hop right into it. This is verse 37, the sixth chapter of Luke. And do not judge, and you shall not be judged at all. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned at all. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. So when we judge and condemn, we're somewhat blaspheming because we're assuming the prerogative, which strictly speaking belongs to Elohim alone. He is the eternal judge, and he condemns and saves. So who are we to judge or condemn a fellow human being who must stand before the same judgment as we do? And if we are judgmental in the course of our life, we will reap what we have sown unto others. We will be judged according to how we judge them, and if we are condemnatory, then we have little hope for eternal salvation, but rather the antidote to judgment is forgiving, and if we are forgiven, we will be forgiven, because divine forgiveness is much too precious a commodity to waste on the unforgiving. Give, and it shall be given to you. A good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over shall be put on your lap. For with the same measure with which you measure, it shall be measured back to you. So in order to get, we have to give. In order to receive the blessings and gifts of divinity, we have to give to humanity while we're on this earth. We also have to give what we can, in however way we can, to the one who made us. But the message communicated in this passage is unmistakably that inasmuch as we give, we can expect to receive. Inasmuch as we were forgiven, we can expect to be forgiven. And inasmuch as we judged, we can expect to be judged. And inasmuch as we condemned, we can have no reason not to expect to be condemned at the judgment. And he spoke a parable to them. Is a blind able to lead a blind? Shall they not both fall into a pit? Now, this was the present spiritual circumstances of the nation of Israel, and the Savior addresses this similarly worded in Matthew 15:14 in his stern rebuke to the Pharisees, but Luke's presentation of it is in a less confrontational setting. This is a sermon addressed to a large and friendly crowd who had gathered him because his reputation for miracles preceded him, and we even read of people outside of Israel at this event. And but to get to the point of the passage, those who are in darkness serve as unreliable guides to those who are in darkness, and the sad fact is that there are degrees of darkness according to which stupid humans tend to gravitate around false teachers who are charismatic but really not the least spiritually discerning at all. That's the truth in our age, and I guess it was the truth in first century Palestine. And the end is that the blind person who leads the blind has no right or reason not to expect to fall into a pit with no one to get them out, all because they followed someone who was in a similar condition as them. And of course, spiritual blindness is harder to detect than physical blindness. A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone perfected shall be like his teacher. So disciple is the word which is used to describe our relationship to him. Now, interesting fact, the word Christian appears a total of 3 times in the New Testament. Christianity appears nowhere, but the word disciples does appear 263 times, and that is to govern and guide our relationship to him. The worth of the disciple is wholly contingent on the value of the master, because the master, the one we follow, is a treasure beyond measure. Then we have worth as disciples, inasmuch as we imitate his teachings, his works, his will, and his way. And so he's clearly using himself as the teacher, yet he, being the consummate Democrat, is elevating his disciples, his servants, to the status of friendship. So he is a king which shares his court with his people. And why do you see the splinter in your brother's eyes, but are not aware of the plank in your own eyes? This ought not be interpreted as to suggest that the splinter, which is likened to sin in one's eyes, ought not to be a concern for us. Only our primary priority, the main sinner we always have to be concerned with, is the one we're looking at in the mirror. So clean house first before you even think about judging others. Now, judgment can be necessary, and it does require a certain delicacy to bring it about in a non-destructive way. So judgment is both necessary and proper within the church, but it is not, the majority of us are not called to exercise judgment. Or how are you able to say to your brother, "Brother, let me take out the splinter that is in your eye," not seeing the plank in your own eye? Hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eyes, and then you shall see clearly to take out the splinter that is in your brother's face. Now, the word hypocrite appears prolifically throughout Matthew's 6th chapter. He condemns the hypocritical practices of publicly fasting, publicly praying, and publicly giving alms. And the same spirit of hypocrisy is alive and embedded in the one who judges another, because when they're so concerned and so concentrated on the sins around them that they neglect to tend to the sin within them and on them and in them and around, noticeable to everyone except them, is that it's really a species of folly and hypocrisy to be walking around pointing out these comparatively trivial sins of others while your own grievous sin is in plain view of all. And there is now a judgmental person who does there's a purpose behind every judgmental person, and the overly zealous in judging others are really motivated by petty or emphasize the petty trivialities. They're nitpickers and busybodies, but the judgment we are called to exercise is more for the grievous and ruining and devastating sins, not necessarily the private sins of others, which in most cases are really no one's business except them and the one who made them. For a good tree does not yield rotten fruits, nor does a rotten tree yield good fruits. So in Matthew's version or account, this is prefaced by a warning against false teachers, but here in Luke it has a broader application to any person in the world. But we can determine the quality of the tree by the plant or the fruit that they sow. So the life is reflected in actions, and this is likened to the fruit which grows from trees, by which we have a clear and obvious witness of our true character and nature. Now, a lot of teachers are skilled at presenting bad arguments in positive ways, but you're going to know them when they by how they walk. For each tree is known by its own fruit, for they do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they gather grapes from a bramble bush. So each tree reproduces according to its own kind. They are biological life forms and have such with reproductive capabilities. Their abilities to reproduce are, strictly speaking, only limited to its own kind, as it is with every other species in creation, including ourselves. So you're not going to get a rose from a thorn bush. That's just, or anything else that is not from the very same thing from which it comes. And this is true with people and teachers, according those who sow evil, and if their teaching is evil, their deeds will be evil. The good man brings forth what is good out of the good treasure of his heart, and the wicked man brings forth what is wicked out of the wicked treasure of his heart. For out of the overflow of the heart his mouth speaks. So in other words, the words of our mouth are a reflection of the contents in our heart. The heart is the center of emotion, which the ancients also likened as the center of cognitive activity. We moderns know it is the brain, but the heart is still an applicable appellation for the motives and intents which guide and govern us. So the principle is parallel. It's much of similar to much of what we have previously read. So good treasure springs from a good heart, just like bountiful harvest springs from a good tree. Good fruit springs from good tree, and the inverse is true. In stark contrast to the wicked and evil, who can only produce after their own kind. So their evil teachings or philosophies or worldviews will reveal themselves by the manner in which they behave. And we can tell a lot about a person by what they say. That is not 100% reliable indication of a person's character or intelligence, but it does tell us a lot. But why do you call me master, master, and do not do what I say? So he's asking them if they call him a master, that implies that they regard him and consider a master, yet they are not doing the master's bidding. They are not doing what he commands them to do. Yet they want all the privileges of calling themselves to him, but they don't want to pay the price. So there is a price to disciples. We must walk in the same path which took our Savior all the way to the cross, and we will never be called to endure anything comparable to that, but we will be called to suffer and be persecuted, even if it's benignly. It's just a part of the job description, and that is no reason to discontinue in the faith, but is in fact a motivator and propeller to march forward into its intended end. Everyone who is coming to me and is hearing my words and is doing them, I shall show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rocks. And when a flood came, the stream burst against that house, but was unable to shake it, for it was founded on the rock. So because he had diligently prepared and built a sturdy home that was able to withstand the pressures of a storm, his house survived, and this is likened to the one who keeps, who learns, who honors, who treasures, keeps, and guards his teachings will be similarly secure in their eternal standing. The earthly home can be likened to our eternal destination. But the one hearing and not doing is like a man who built a house on the earth without a foundation, against which the streams burst, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. So in contrast between the wise person, the diligent person, is the foolish and the lazy, who does not take the necessary preparations to build that which is designed to endure this storm, which as soon as it comes, his house is in rubble and ruin, and all because he was lazy and foolish and neglected to take seriously the word which was coming out of the mouth of God in the form of his Son. And there was a lot to argue against from the natural man's standpoint, but the easy way and the lazy way out is never the smart way. It does not end well for those who are too lazy, too cowardly, or too foolish to do what he commands us to do. And he does ask us a lot, but he does give us the power to get through it. Apart from him, we are nothing. With him inside us, us abiding in him and him abiding in us, we are everything. So I hope you're here to cultivate such an ideal relationship, and I'm glad to help in however way I can to guide you through that. So stay tuned. That's all the time we have for today. Stay tuned till next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.